Which player is the fantasy community most wrong about? That and more this week on the couch. On the couch, we're joined with royalty, Lord Reeves, Rich Hribar. Rich, who is the hive mind most wrong about as we go into the lull before the storm?
Let's see. I want to kind of pick a good one here. I want to pick a good player too that I believe is a good player. So I'm going to go with Adam Thielen right now, a guy who's a consensus wide receiver 1 in ADP. Last year we saw a lot of the upside at the beginning of the season. He was the actual fantasy wide receiver 1. But, the back half of the season kind of showed us, too, that was kind of like he needs to kind of have this once-in-a-career type volume level to sustain that type of ceiling. You look at the back half of the season, he posted just one top 20 scoring week over his final 8 games. He was outplayed by Diggs. We've seen the passing volume kind of, drop down, the back of the season with the Vikings. We know inherently they want to run the football more. Whether they can or not is, a question that needs to be asked. But, they went in the first round. They drafted, an award-winning center. They get Dalvin Cook back healthy, coming back as a full season this year. The defense is still plenty capable, too, of creating game script for them to at least stack rushing attempts. Whether they're effective or not doesn't matter with them. We kind of saw this a couple years ago with the Vikings. They had a real pass heavy, type season when they, kind of relied on, McKinnon and Asiata, to fill in. And then the next season kind of bounced back and, we're more run heavy. That was, Dalvin Cook's rookie year. Then they had to turn back to McKinnon, in that season as well. So, I think we see something similar. I still believe that Thielen is, in the top 20 wide receiver range, but I think he's more like a mid wide receiver too from a lineup setting standpoint, which is how we should be treating fantasy football anyways. We should, you should be thinking about how we're going to use the players from a lineup setting standpoint. And Thielen is a guy who is a little more volume driven. I kind of flat outright just like Julian Edelman more than Adam Thielen, who goes.
You took the words out of my mouth. Really,
that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for.
No, because that was exactly where I was going with this. Is that in the third round, because this comes down to actionable advice, right, Rich? It's like in the third round, if you want to take a high floor wide receiver in a PPR league, you take Julian Edelman.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's set up for him. And I get more and more fascinated with James White because I just look at this offense, Rich, and I think because what you were talking about with Thielen, and I think our starting point is always picturing the ecosystem for the player. And then that defines the width of the range of outcomes for the player and whether it tilts to the top or it tilts to the bottom. And when we think about Thielen and what he represents, and that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, is really when we have a name. And I think, Rich, I've been doing this for a while. You've been doing this for a while, man, too. Look at the length of your beard. It's you think of players as a name. So you think of the things that are contained within like what's in that picture. But in reality, a player is an intersection of a whole bunch of different factors. Like there's many factors as comes together to make weather, and we think of those factors, and Adam Thielen just isn't that exciting. Stephon Diggs just isn't that exciting. Maybe the passing efficiency gets better. The offensive line should be better in Minnesota. Rest in peace, Tony Sperano. Hopefully they don't have to endure anything like that in the preseason. They get Garrett Bradbury. But at the same time, it's going to be a low-volume offense. And as you said, we saw the two sides of the coin with Adam Thielen. And we kind of feel like we know what he represents. And as you said, I'm doing wide receiver tiers. I should get them out like today or tomorrow. And he's a high-floor wide receiver too. Diggs is a high-floor wide receiver too. And then we think about what these players represent, the ecosystems they represent. And you think about that New England ecosystem, and it just seems like Brady will lean on what works. And most plays, that's Edelman and or White. And then we'll see about what third or fourth option. And the running game, of course, Damian Harris. And I think that these either-or choices is a step in evolution of our understanding of how we're going to attack the 2019 season. As I said, Rich, you've been doing this for a while, man. And it's funny because the fantasy... it's great. I think we've talked... It's been at least 3, 4, 5 years since the first time we talked on the couch. And the fantasy football podcast media sphere is getting bigger and bigger every year, which is fantastic because it's supporting interest. It's supporting all you great people out there listening and watching. But it also feels like, wow, it's June. And in some ways it's good that it's a lull. You just got back from vacation. I'm about to go on vacation, by the way. And not that things aren't going to be continuing to blow up at football guys, folks, as we're getting ramped up for the season. But, the whole football world exhales right now. And Rich, it feels like we've already talked a lot of stuff to death in the last couple of months. And there's not that there's a shortage of things to talk about, and there are things to react to. But as you're watching all this reacting, we're like professional reactors to things, as Cecil would say, react to me. What's the taste in your mouth? What's your feeling coming out of this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, I've really kind of scaled back my off-season Twitter use. I find like that's just the most rewarding
Yes.
for my experience. Especially I start to ramp up in June. We start working on the draft guide at Roto World. It's when I really start putting a lot of work into things, and I kind of start nursing my way back into Twitter. I mean, because I've talked about it on this show before too. This little stretch of fantasy football is my least favorite part of fantasy football and doing fantasy football analysis. I mean, we're kind of encouraged as fantasy analysts to kind of look backwards at seasons in bulk and look forward at seasons in bulk. When I talked about it with Adam Thielen, I mean, we should be typically looking at players from a lineup setting standpoint, which is how we should be treating them, not because this guy was the RB11 or he was the RB15 in points per game. We should be thinking about what this guy represents for your lineup every week. I mean, you take a guy like Tariq Cohen, for example. He's an RB1 overall. He looks as a mid RB2 in points per game, but he's really more of an RB2 flex in a career year, for how you put him in your lineups. And that's fine, if you're drafting him for that. But if you're drafting him as, an RB2 that you think you're going to plug him in as your RB2 in your lineup every week, I mean, you're probably going to run into some potholes when the season, comes along. So, I mean, I kind of just want to get through this because, I do an article, the worksheet that I do, is more like expectation based. I mean, I like to look at players and think about where they are in this individual, spectrum of, is this guy going to overachieve this week? Is he going to underachieve? Is he going to give you about right on par performance? And that's kind of what I try to do in the summertime when I'm drafting teams too, that's why I do my tiers a little bit different than people do tiers. I've tweeted them out before. I kind of lump guys together by archetype and then paired with volume and opportunity. So, a guy like Nick Chubb, I would definitely rank higher than a guy like Marlon Mack, but their situations, volume, and how they're used in an offense is pretty similar. So they end up in the same, they end up in the same tier of players, even though I definitely think Chubb is better than Mack. But I'm kind of doing it from that route, and then when you do it from that route and you have an expectation base, like we talked about, with a guy like Thielen, versus a guy like Julian Edelman, you end up with a lot more opportunities from a draft structure to end up with, arbitrage potential. I remember a couple years ago I was on the show and I said that Mark Ingram was Eddie Lacy arbitrage, and some guy tweeted me back, and it still sticks out of my mind that it was just insane. But it was just when you were talking about how players were used and how they score fantasy points, it ended up being that Mark Ingram ended up being a better player that year than Eddie Lacy. And that's just kind of how I group my tiers and players together. And, if you're not looking at it from a lineup, setting stance, building a fantasy team, I mean, you're going to end up just running into a lot of problems. You're going to end up falling into what I call like the value trap. You're taking players based on ADP instead of players you want. And, I've learned, over the years, and I've made this mistake 100 times. I'm sure you have too, the ADP trap. I even did it last year. No one's 100%. I remember last year I didn't want Demaryius Thomas at all in any league. In like one league, he fell like 3.5 rounds past where he typically goes. And, it's whatever. I'll take Demaryius Thomas. Well, guess how many games I ended up using Demaryius Thomas last year? You should definitely be thinking about not trying to win your draft. It's too much an emphasis. We spend these 2 months with just tunnel vision on grading these drafts. Look at my mock draft, look at this team I drafted, and everyone gives you the tweets or responses back. And I like to share those too. And you can definitely learn stuff from that. But, you're lucky to escape a season or reach the fantasy playoffs with half your roster intact. You need to be taking the players you want to have on your roster. Who do you want on your roster? Eliminate guys off your board. Don't fall into that trap. If you don't want LaShawn McCoy, just take him off. Don't worry about where his ADP goes. Don't have him on your list.
Right.
That's what you should be doing.
This is beautiful. Music to my ears, Rich. This is beautiful, man. Because take players you want. It's like, there are things that I like to promulgate out there in the industry, Rich, that are kind of cheeky. Like every plan works if you take the right players, But
sure.
and a lot of and one of the other draft strategy tips I've always had, like number one is always know your scoring and lineup. Like seriously, arbitrage. You want to talk about arbitrage? Arbitrage can be gained. The first layer off the top of arbitrage you can gain is by looking at your scoring and lineups and understand how that bends player values at different positions and apply that to your board. That's probably one of the easiest ways right off the bat to have an advantage over your competition. But then, I'll say, well, what after that? Take players you want. I love it. I love saying take players you want. And it stands for not just take who you want, because what if you're wrong? What if you want bad players? Well, I mean, that's the thing. That's why we like fantasy football, is finding out whether we're right or wrong. But what you're saying is, because the other half of that equation, the other half of that Demaryius Thomas equation, Rich, is who did you pass on? Right? Like like it might hurt you. It might end up being somebody like whatever, Marlon Mack. It might have been somebody that you're like you wanted, and ADP said, well, they only represent this, but you're like, yeah, but when I look at them, I see something that's worth a lot more like this. And especially at this early juncture, if you're drafting, there are players available in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th rounds that I do think that the collective ADP, that's why I started with who's the collective mind wrong about. We're going to catch up. I mean, the collective mind is going to catch up. Like Damian Harris is going to be an 8th or 9th round pick, no matter what Sony Michel does in camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you saw the hive mind catch up quickly with Gurley and Henderson and how that's working. And maybe it's overreacting, but at least it's a reaction. There are some things that you look at the board right now, and that player that you're taking, so I'll give you an example of players that I think are ADP traps this year. Okay. Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard.
Sure.
Right? Because as you talk about, what do they represent in your lineup every week? Okay. What they represent in your lineup every week is one of 4 roughly equally ranked targets between Ingram, Barkley, and the two of them in a horizontal, unexciting pass offense that may or may not be piloted by a rookie quarterback. And if it's not, it'll be by a quarterback in decline on a team that seems to be rudimentary in their approach to offensive football. So you're talking about, your high point weeks for any of these guys as a receiver are like 6 for 80 and a touchdown. But more often than not, they're going to represent like 3 for 30 or 4 for 40. All of them. And it's going to add up to like a meh day from the Giants passing game. But ADP says, but projections say, oh, but each of them are going to catch 60 balls for 700 yards or 70 balls for 800 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. That looks like wide receiver 30. That looks like a value in the 8th or 9th round. But in the 8th or 9th round, to take them where they're never going to move the needle in your lineup, you're passing on Damian Harris or Dallas Goedert or whoever. I mean, I have mine, you have yours. Take your guys in those rounds. The 5th round or 6th round even, take your guys. Like after the first 3 or 4 rounds, especially early on, take your guys. So, Rich, who are a couple of your guys if you take your own advice?
Yeah, and I think we should totally anticipate. You should approach the Giants like Daniel Jones is going to play.
Exactly. That's why Barkley's 4th. And you can disagree with you on that, but again, react to it and at least address it.
Yeah, so since 2008, there's been 32 quarterbacks selected in the first round of the NFL draft. Of those 32, 15 of them started immediately week 1. 22 of those players were starting for the organizations by week 4 of the season.
Right.
24 of those players started more than half of the team games. And if we want to shrink it down to just high equity, high draft capital picks, 21 of those quarterbacks I talked about were selected within the top 10 picks of the respective draft. 18 of those 21 started 11 or more games as a rookie. Do we really think there's going to, like, the Giants are going to be good enough from a winning standpoint to keep Daniel Jones off the field, given on the clock? The clock's going to start on him. Pat Shermer's already his 2nd year. Gettleman is going to be against the gun because he made this pick that was controversial. Like, there's going to be pressure to put him on the field, early in the season, because based on how I think we're all expecting the Giants to kind of go as an organization this year. So we should expect him to play. And I'll tell you one thing about Saquon Barkley, who he had the 3rd most receptions as a rookie in NFL history, not just running backs, like in NFL history for any player. Those checkdowns are going to turn into some Daniel Jones scrambles when Daniel Jones gets on the field. Like, that's going to happen. But I mean, it's hard to like supremely fade, Saquon Barkley. No. You're talking about moving him to RB4. It's still keeping him in a tier of elite, running backs.
Right.
It's not.
But I'll never draft him. He'll always be gone by the 4th pick.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but I mean, you never know if you run that situation. I was on I have Ezekiel Elliott as my RB1. So I mean, I'm still there with him. Nothing's really like left to change that for me. But kind of getting into where like you led the question, kind of ADP traps and the guys I want. I kind of look at it from like a historical bust stance tied with how I feel about individual players. I mean, the high alarm area for me always in drafts is the RB15 to RB30 30 group. I mean, that's kind of where historical bust rates, and where if you consistently buy running backs, past like in the RB30 to RB50 range, you're still getting, similar hit rates and similar, points, per top dollar, running backs that you would get in that area. So I look at that area, and if I don't think the running back has legit RB1 upside, he's just not a guy I'm willing to roster in that area. And the only two guys I kind of see in that area that I believe have true RB1 upside are, Aaron Jones and Devontae Freeman. And Devontae Freeman kind of has too many red flags for me to like really get into bed with, but I'm drafting him in best ball leagues. I think I'm a little sketchier in redraft just because of the injury history, the concussions, the lower body injuries. But, when you're talking about guys like, Kerryon Johnson, I might like Kenyon Drake. I can tell myself a story on Marlon Mack. We talked about you can spin a yarn on, but that's like the area where you're getting these high bust rate running backs, and that's also an area when you get into we're talking about bust rates just from a positional standpoint where the ceiling and floor hits. The wide receivers are just objectively safer in that area. I mean, you're talking about that RB30 area, 15 to 30 area I talked about. Now that's when we're starting to see guys like A.J. Green, Brandon Cooks, Julian Edelman, Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, Tyler Lockett, Sammy Watkins, Jarvis Landry, Mike Williams, Alshon Jeffrey. All those guys at the wide receiver position go off the board in the RB15, RB30 area. I'm just supremely more happy to start with 2 to 3 running backs and then start drafting wide receivers in that area and then come back and circle around to running backs after that, because that's when you can get your Darrell Hendersons, your Justice Hills, Miles Sanders, Rashad Penny's, even guys like, the deeper down. I mean, Ronald Jones is a guy I objectively hated last year as a draft pick. Thought he should have been drafted that high. Don't like him. But I mean, you're getting basically all kind of upside at this point to take a swing around RB40 on a guy like him who could lead the backfield and opportunity. And then, you got guys like Chase Edmonds, who is the cheapest of the air quotes, like this dude can win you some shit if there's an injury, kind of like John Connor was at this point, last year. I mean, you like, I don't ever enter a draft and don't think I don't leave with Chase Edmonds.
Sure. No, and we don't know how he's going to be used either. The whole Arizona offense is exciting. I'll try not to get into that topic again. I'll let you say your piece if you want. No, but what I like about this, Rich, what you give is it's the starting point. It's the first block where you can say, okay, now let's. You said something in there that you want to start with 2 or 3 running backs, and so you assess the landscape, and the strategy starts to present itself. And in that range, like you said, there are wide receivers that are just more appealing. The exception is, and this year, I do wonder, Rich, if this year is going to be where you said RB 15 to 30, and I wonder if it's more like RB 18 to 35 or something like that, because there is a pocket of running back value in the 3rd and 4th round this year. Like you said, Kerryon Johnson, Devontae Freeman, Aaron Jones, all of these guys are like easily have top 10 seasons in their range of outcome. So it makes you a little more open to, in those first 2 or 3, maybe only one running back, maybe because there's wide receiver value in the 2nd round. Travis Kelce's in the 2nd round. Or you might want to have an elite tight end as part of your strategy. You're going to have to take them in your first 3 picks. So you start to think about that. But I want to ask you, you didn't include Damian Williams as a player that is in that. I mean, he's outside of the top. He's made his way, inside of the top 15, top 12.
Yeah.
How do you feel about taking him as a 2nd round pick right now? How do you feel about him as one of those 2 or 3 running backs early in your draft?
Yeah, I don't like paying the tax on Damian Williams, but I am a believer in Damian Williams. He's an auction target for me because, we talk about these players all the time from like a redraft standpoint, but we don't actually talk about the discrepancy of, taking players in redraft where you have to make a hard stance on a player and there's the legit opportunity cost when you take a guy. At any point in a snake draft, you're not getting it. You're bypassing a player, and you're not getting a pick for several other picks unless you're on the turn. So I mean, Damian Williams, where he goes in ADP, is around legit opportunity cost. There are strong fantasy assets that you can have tangible faith in around Damian Williams that you have to make a decision on if you want to select him or not. I am a believer in his talent. I always was. Bloom, if I could tell you how many rosters I
Yeah.
had Damian Williams
Dropped
on
him.
in Dynasty that I did no longer have him on
Yeah.
at the end of last season. I mean, I hung on to this guy for 3 or 4 years, just kind of didn't know what was going to happen. Obviously it was hard to foresee the events that transpired to elevate him last year. But I mean, he was a guy that was always intriguing from a profile stance, a collegiate profile stance, an athletic profile stance, your receiver receiving back for his size, in an athletic profile. I had him on so many rosters, and he's on like 1 or 2 now, and it's so disheartening. So I still am holding on to that a little bit, but in an auction draft, now we have an opportunity to mitigate that opportunity cost. You can block off sections of the draft that you may not like. I can say take rounds 5 through 7, for example, and where you would allocate those draft dollars that have a binary value that would latch over onto what they should be when you go down your list in your draft guide or wherever projections you create, the player amount of fab you should be bidding on these guys or auction dollars you have. I can eliminate a chunk of that now and say I'm not going to target any players in this section of the draft,
Right.
but I am going to go for 3 or 4 players in this section of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm into in an auction getting Damian Williams at that cost, because now I'm pairing him with surrounding talent that are coming around the same tier. I'm not making as a hardline stance of making a binary player choice of I have to take Damian Williams or this other player. Now I can get Damian Williams and that other player or another player around him. So he's more of an auction target for me. But I mean, you look at him last year, 114.4 yards from scrimmage and 9 total touchdowns while averaging 25.4 PPR points per game. And he had 15 or fewer touches in 3 of those 5 games as starter. I mean, I'm talking about the playoff game as well, the two playoff games he had. So, I mean, he's not a guy that needs that true Andy Reid type of volume. I mean, he can be a guy that gets you 14 to 17 touches and still deliver that because of the pass catching equity and what he brings as a receiver. So I'm still a buy there, but there is legit risk of paying. I mean, we were talking about a 27-year-old, that is coming off a 5-year career that never popped on the fantasy radar.
Right. Well, I'm finding myself becoming more intrigued by it all, Rich, because mainly because of Kansas City, because of Kansas City's offense. Although some of the hit, who knows how many games we'll see Tyreek Hill. If Tyreek Hill's out, some of that hit will filter down to the running back ability to produce. One of the other things that surprised me, honestly, is that I think Carlos Hyde, even though they signed him to a deal where he's getting paid more than Damian Williams, I believe. I mean, both of them are getting paid like nothing because of running backs. Is an afterthought in fantasy. So it's like, ooh, there's some hesitation. Can he hold up for the whole year? Just we've never seen him be a feature back for a whole season. It's like skepticism. So okay, the idea being this: Kansas City running back is going to be a player we project in the top 10 every week. But if you take Damian Williams in the 2nd round and Carlos Hyde in the 9th or 10th or whatever, you're probably going to get that production. It's the same thing as taking Gurley and Henderson. I think it's defensible to take Gurley in the 2nd, early 3rd round, and then take Henderson in the 6th or 7th, although Henderson may get to the 5th. Because the idea is you're getting production that you expect to be similar to a Barkley, Elliott, Kamara, McCaffrey kind of production. I mean, in the ballpark, but at a great discount. And this is where auction comes in. And I'm glad we don't talk about auction nearly enough. And look, going all the way back,
we usually center around everything around ADP, but yeah,
it's our audience, and we want to serve our audience. But it's June, and we can talk about what we want to talk about in June. And I think that auction format, going back to my fantasy football roots, which are a long time ago now, some of my favorite leagues and favorite drafts and moments were auction drafts. Yeah. And there's a different psychology to the draft. Like the coolest thing about an auction is that, you do, I've said this on the show so many times, if you do a redraft, snake draft, and then you scramble draft slots and you do it again, probably 50% of the rosters or more are still going to be the same, whether you're drafting 1st or 12th. And it's a different, narrower set of decisions, a different psychology, a different atmosphere. But in an auction draft, you could get 12 of us together to do an auction draft, and then do the 12 of us again and have wildly different teams. And if you do have the same players, the prices could be wildly different. And there's a layer of playing the auction. And also, I think, Rich, what else is really interesting about how you can approach an auction is that ADP is defined by the person who's the most optimistic about a player, right? But auction price is determined by the person that's second most optimistic, right? Because without that second most optimistic person, the price never gets bid up. So if you are higher on a player at a level that is greatly exceeding your peers out there, your people in your league, then in an auction league, it rewards you more because you can make up that way. Like, hey, I'm willing to go $12 on Kiki Cutie. No one else is even going to go past 8, So we're good. And it's like getting to pick them at their round ADP round instead of having to reach for them, or otherwise not having someone compete. So auction is great. And really what I want to say mostly about auction is if you haven't done an auction league, even the online auctions, they've got all the bugs worked out. They work well. Some of them are real adrenaline inducing with the time limits. But auction's a great format, and it's another way to go a little bit deeper if you want to. So
there's nothing like a live auction. I mean, a lot
it's
of fantasy
exciting.
is where you want to go.
It really gets your heart thumping, and in a really fun way. And it people talk about draft remorse. Oh my god.
Every auction has draft. It's great. You like every
sick.
guy leaves.
Sometimes you're physically sick, right? Like sometimes you look at your roster and you look at some of the players and the prices they went for, and you remember the moments when you were deciding to not bid on a player, or you had just spent your wad thinking, well, there's only one other player I want. They're not going to come out for a while. They come out right away or whatever. Some transpiring of events. It makes you physically sick to think that, you feel like you blew it. But like you said, everybody has that feeling about it.
Yeah. You always talk about now that the audience can see us, you always talk about it's like a U, right?
Yeah.
So each tier is like a U.
Mm-hmm.
You get the start of the tier, your Saquon Barkley's, your Christian McCaffrey's, they go for a price, right? They set the market for the tier. You want to be in the middle, right? You want to, because that's where you get the value. You don't pay the top, but you're in the middle. But then if you wait too long, it starts to come back up because they know, because you got two owners saying, well, this is the last guy. This is the last guy. I got to get him. And that's when you end up paying $35 for Torrey Smith.
Yes. You guys spend it on something. It's like timeouts at the end of the game. Like you don't get anything for having them. And that's why, and we don't talk auction strategy enough on this show. I do have an auction. I put auction values out, and I think auction strategy is it's so elusive. I have one piece of auction strategy, and you can use this moment to think if you want to pass, because I get stuff every year, and folks, I do hear you. I hear all of you. I love all of you, and I wish I could clone myself and make it so we could do everything, but unfortunately that's not possible. But I hear people every year saying more auction. Do at least one show in the preseason dedicated to auction. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but we're on the topic right now, and I'll go over my general starting point strategy, which I think can be 50% or more of your preparation for an auction. And it is this. You're really only going to rank 100 to 120 players. In an auction, the rest are $1 players. The rest don't matter, or one unit. It doesn't matter. And you're going to rank these players from 1 to 100, and you're going to roughly think about them. And you can put in a spreadsheet and figure out the numbers so that, in 100 units, first round picks are going to roughly be worth 24 to 35, and 18 second round picks. You follow where I'm going with this, Rich, right? And just rank the players, and it can be your personal rankings. It can be just off of a set of projections, or someone else's rankings, and just scale it down so everyone's value in that top 100 or 120 adds up to about 1,000 units. If you have 12 teams and everyone has 100 units, so 85%. It's actually 83.333, depending on how the math goes. So you want to make sure that these numbers reflect a way that the auction should go. Okay. Saquon Barkley 34, Alvin Kamara 33, whatever. Dante Pettis 6. You're going down in your signing values. Just making sure if everyone spends their money, this is about what these players will be worth in this scenario. And then the first 4 or 5 players that go out, or 5 to 10, just sit back, unless it's someone you really love, and watch what they go for and compare them to those numbers. And it's going to give you an idea whether people are overpaying early or underpaying early. And if people are overpaying early, then you just sit back, because there's going to come a point in the draft, there's going to be more value to be bought than money, and you're going to be happy. But if people are underpaying and timid, and this is going to happen more often, and you got to act quickly, you got to get your money out there. Because there's always that tipping point in a draft where one realizes it's probably better to have already spent your money, isn't it? Because if everyone's being tight, then later on, all the money left on the board is going to inflate whatever's left, and you're going to overpay for whatever you get. So that's, I think, the best thing you can do to react to an auction as it's happening is just have that preparation, understand whether everyone's overpaying or underpaying. But then otherwise, Rich, I think the strategy is like, take players you want, like commit, and ADP isn't there to throw you off. There's just hopefully how you feel about the player.
Yeah, typically every auction I've ever had where I hit the most remorse is just where I didn't commit. That's typically what you have. I actually, like I said, I brought Damian Williams as an example. I'm far less risk averse in auction drafts because I want as many players that I believe have the higher ceilings, these weak winning type ceilings. I want to acquire as many of those as possible, and then I'll figure out the rest as we go. Because, like I said, I'm planning on making ancillary moves as the season goes on anyway. So if I've got a litany of dollar players, that are going to have rate or replace a high replaceability factor, I'm not so concerned with that. Whereas in a redraft, there's a section of the draft and everyone's drafting RB2s, everyone's drafting RB3s, same thing at every position. Whereas in an auction, the players come out at different levels. You can have someone try to sneak through a sleeper early, a guy that they like, as opposed to, you might have a guy that lasts on the, like I said, the back of the tier. He might last for 3 rounds of you guys nominating players, but everyone knows he exists. My favorite is when the room acts like no one knows that the guy's there still. But then 4 owners are, like I said, you're bidding up a player just to way higher than the initial tier started at. It always happens to someone. So I definitely am a lot more aggressive, auction player than I am, of a snake draft player. Because like I said, if I'm getting to a point of opportunity cost, like you have to make a hard line in the sand and redraft, I'm definitely a little more risk averse there. So yeah, that's kind of where it is, between how I play auction and how I play redraft. But I will say that I respect both, but nothing is like live auction, and nothing allows the more diversity for fantasy, outcomes than an auction, like you alluded to.
Yeah, it's fun, folks. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. You're a regimented thinker. I love the worksheet, and I know you have a process, and you're very humble in putting yourself aside and just letting the process lead to the outcomes. But I also know, as we go to training camp here in about a month, Rich, less than a month, they just put all the dates out, that there's like blank spaces, right? There's variables right now in your projection, your expectation for a player, that at the very least training camp will start to shade in a little bit. Preseason will shade in. What are some of the bigger blank spots right now for you that you're looking forward to start to fill in from some data or information that we're going to get soon?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's the one position that it's already starting to happen. Every guy's starting to get kind of hyped there is that, that secondary Packers wide receiver. Definitely, because I believe that there's bounce back for Aaron Rodgers, even in a new scheme. He had basically a season low career touchdown rate last year. I am, kind of, my SWAT. Everyone kind of has like their redhead, the version of fantasy player they like. And, Marcus Valdes-Scantling is that for me. Like I'm just allured to that type of guy. Granted, I've taken plenty of hits down the line between Devontae Davis and, Alan Lazard's of the world. But when you hit those Cameron Merediths and Tyrell Williams of the world, it feels good. And, Marcus Valdes-Scantling was a guy got in a lot of drafts last year. He just kind of fit a lot of objective boxes. I look like they said I know it's like everyone has that thing that they are allured to. So whether it be you're into pass catching running backs, or you're into like these, a slot type of guy, these splash play receivers like that, like big vertical, guy that can move around and play big slot but has vertical upside. Like those are my guys. Like I love those guys. That's
Hakeem Butler, man.
Yeah,
Hakeem
Butler is that. Yeah, he is that guy. We talk about Hakeem Butler. His slot production last year at Iowa State was just insane. He averaged over 25 yards per catch in the slot. A lot of people don't realize how much of his production came from the slot because they look at the vertical production and just associate with that being in the size and associate with that being a perimeter receiver. But he did a lot of damage as a big slot. And we saw Valdes-Scantling. He was 18th in yards after the catch last year of all wide receivers, 5.7 yards. So he's got that yak ability too to play some big slot and take away some of those snaps that Randall Cobb leaves vacated. But then he also led all rookie wide receivers in receiving yardage on targets 28 plus yards downfield, all rookie wide receivers. And that's basically playing kind of like
some nice catches, made some nice adjustments and nice catches too. There were some times that he did the work to earn the reception more than Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers basically played on one leg last year.
Yeah.
So we're going to get Rodgers back a healthy. I think Rodgers is also like he's extra little surly this offseason. So I'm
Oh,
kind of I don't want to play the angry Aaron. I don't want to do that by any means, the angry Aaron narrative. But he's already a little chippy. He's already a little red ass there. So I'm excited to see that come back. But I mean, Geronimo Allison too is just if he's the guy that wins that role. I mean, Geronimo Allison was up until last year, whether or not Jordy Nelson or Randall Cobb missed time, he was a productive player. And then last year, he had that job to start, and he had 12 or more PPR points in every game. The first month of the season was a wide receiver 3 or higher in all of those games. So, I mean, if he wins that job too, he is also, a guy that I'm interested in, and I've been drafting those guys a ton. But, we're even starting to see Jake Kumro,
yes.
get, some hype.
Trevor Davis is sneaking in there too, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see that. So, I mean, that's a situation we want to see play out. You brought up the Pats backfield there. Obviously, we want to see that. How many reps is Damian Harris getting with that first unit in the preseason? We're waiting. The Rams situation is interesting because we're not going to see Todd Gurley play. You know it. I know it. We're having no clarity. Like, what we know about Todd Gurley and everything to this point has been negative. It's going to remain negative. Like, there's no, like, what do we foresee changing? Like, he's not going to play. McVay didn't play any of those guys last year. So I mean, he's definitely probably not going to play now. I mean, I don't expect him to play. So I mean, that's going to be curious to see. Like, so if Darrell Henderson, if he's guy that does get reps, and he bucks off one of those 65-yarders, exactly. I mean, it's gonna go nuclear. If Darrell Henderson that first game has that Amir Abdullah like Ron, because this is a guy that averaged 10 yards per carry in college for 2 years, not 1 year. Like 2 years. And then when you look at the success he had on outside zone runs and how many outside zone runs, the Rams run. I talked about when they drafted him, and it was before this kind of snowballed to the point it was now. The first year McVay was with the Rams, he tried to do this with Tavon Austin. He tried to make Tavon Austin like the ancillary running back. He didn't throw to him. He used Tavon Austin as like this ancillary big play running back. It didn't work out. It just didn't work out. So now you get a guy that actually is that with the pedigree of that, and you're plugging him into that role. There's a reason they traded up for him. So, I mean, I think we'll see him in the preseason if he does play. Pop one of these and go like you talk. His ADP's already gone crazy. What if he does that? He's gonna go
fourth round.
Insane. It's gonna be insane.
Fourth round, maybe even third round. Well, no. Look, we've talked. I've had this topic on the show almost every week, but it's a massive topic. It's basically like the first thing you do in your fantasy prep this year is figure out how you feel about the Rams backfield. I think I even said that last week or the week before. But I love it. I love it because Rich, like unlike me, like you're not necessarily excitable. You generally keep an even keel about the stuff, but obviously I can tell like this is exciting. Pondering Darrell Henderson, and again, interior offensive line. I think it was Dan Williamson. He said no one's talking about that. I try to mention it every time I bring up the Rams. They have 2 new stars on the offensive line, unproven players. So how they went for Cincinnati. And look, if you want to tell a regression narrative for the Rams offense as a whole, it's credible. They had a lull, a slump in the second half of the season. The Patriots, blueprints, Cup. It might not be full speed to start the season. We'll see how that goes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not a bad offense, just not league elite efficiency offense. They come back to earth. So that's something to ponder with the offensive line. I think is the biggest part of that. But all this talk about Gurley and we've overblown Gurley's knee, et cetera, as an argument against Darrell Henderson ADP. Darrell Henderson can achieve value at 5th or 6th round ADP with Todd Gurley getting 300 touches next year. No problem. When you see what kind of space CJ Anderson, I say this every week, Rich, when you plug Henderson into the touches Anderson was getting, Henderson's going to take some of those to the house that Anderson just can't. And like you said, then that everything falls apart. And what we underestimate, because we spend so much time looking at this stuff in the offseason, is that things don't creep and happen incrementally. The pendulum goes whoop, and it just moved. Darrell Henderson gets a 70-yard run in the preseason. Whoop, now he's going to get 12 to 15 touches a week because why would you not give him 12 to 15 touches a week? And if it's in the same kind of offense we saw in 2018, those are going to be valuable touches. He can do it without a Gurley doomsday scenario. But the Gurley doomsday scenario is out there. And I love how you come back to, Rich, always week winning upside, right? So, I mean, we talked in the Patriots, and Damian Harris's ADP is going to catch up. Another player that I think has week winning upside that's being valued incorrectly right now is Josh Gordon. And like you said, half of our players or more aren't even going to be on our roster in the fantasy playoffs if we make it, fantasy gods willing. Josh Gordon, I don't care if he's not on my roster in week 2. In fact, that might be a scenario that works out for me. He could get reinstated or at least be close to reinstatement by the beginning of the season. If he is, he's an instant starter, every week starter, like wide receiver 2. High ceiling wide receiver 2. If he's not, if by the time we get to the season, there's no sign that he's going to get reinstated, he hasn't applied, et cetera, fine. You have an open spot for the week 2 waiver wire run. To me, Rich, he's a 10th. He should be a 10th or 11th round pick, and I'm not seeing it out there.
Yeah, let me circle back to the Rams real fast. Just
please do.
You off.
No, go ahead.
Just to give his take. So
and cut me off if you want to, by the way, because I'm doing that to you right now.
We talk about the range of outcomes, and you talked about the range of outcomes for Darrell Henderson to be a viable fantasy player with Todd Gurley, which definitely exists. The thing is, if that happens, is not being talked about enough as well. So if that happens, we're getting a trickle down where some other guys are not going to live up to where they're going. The Brandon Cooks, the Cooper Kupps, the Robert Woods of the world. Because there's a scenario where I see that, the correlation, always brought up as a counter as this could be like the Saints backfield. You got Ingram, Kamara, but better. But those Saints teams were also throwing the ball 650 times and not supporting a true like weekly wide receiver 3 like the Rams were doing, the front half of last year. So if they shift to more of a more of an 11 more of a go from 11 personnel team to playing more 12, doing stuff like that, or using 2 backs more often, we're going to see a trickle down where it's going to hurt Robert. I would say in order it would be Robert Woods, Kupp, and then Cooks. Kupp is a guy you have to have at least a little bit of pause on just because, I'm no Dr. Gene, but, he tore his ACL in week 10. We should expect him to start slow. And, he's still a guy that gets drafted pretty often in the top 20 wide receivers. But a lot of people aren't putting a Henderson factor into these wide receivers. Because if Henderson hits and he becomes a guy that you have to give touches to, he not only hurts Todd Gurley, he's going to hurt someone else. Because this is an offense that's only going to throw the ball 550 to 560 times with Jared Goff. It's not going to be like those Brees Saints teams that are throwing it 650 times. It's going to be still in that range of outcomes. McVay's shown he's pretty conservative in terms of run-pass splits and how often they run and pass the football, even when you account for situation. So, I mean, he wants to run the football a bit more than the average coach that we, think is more, high nuance as it pleads the new NFL. He wants to run the football a little bit more. So, I mean, if Henderson is a guy that gets these touches, it's going to hurt one of these Rams guys, a lot. And we saw towards the end of the season, without Kupp on the field, and they kind of ran more of that offense. Those guys, either of those receivers, were kind of just like Woods was just like an okay solid receiver, like we talked about, like kind of like a Thielen mold. And then Cooks was really bad without Kupp on the field. All of his high end production came with Cooper Kupp on the field because obviously you have to guard the middle of the field more. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. Josh Gordon, like you said, it all comes down to what we know in August. I think right now. And we're drafting more of the best ball mindset. So there's you're covered with opportunity costs with Josh Gordon. If we know it's going to be 6 games, what he costs, what with replaceability, and when what he should be. And you look at him last year from weeks 4 through 15, he was the wide receiver 32 in overall scoring. He had 17.2 yards per catch, which was 10th at the position. Big play guy. He had a high floor. We didn't really get that high ceiling from him, but, got traded midseason, and, it's kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to do. I do worry a little bit about Brady's, just vertical upside at this point as a passer. But, I mean, considering where you say, like, 10th through 12th round, yeah, the upside and floor is still in place. And everything the Patriots have shown, through the indefinite suspension, placing the 2.1, million restricted free agent tender on him, paying for his rehab process, having a guy like Tom Brady involved, we see at the Instagram post, while his status completely up in the air is all really encouraging, for a guy like Josh Gordon. Like you said, it comes down to what will we know in August? If it looks like it's a situation where we don't have an answer, he's a guy that I won't draft, and I'll just pick him up from the guy that drafts him and cuts him.
Right.
I kind of feel like that way about Goddard a little bit too. I feel like Goddard's going to be one of those guys that people are going to be in a real rock and hard place early on in the season before, we start to see this, offense kind of really hatch itself out, with Philadelphia, with all the moving parts coming in and just how many different personnel sets are at their disposal now this year compared to last year when they basically had everyone injured. I think Goddard's going to be one of those guys that people want to draft for the upside, but then are in a real tough spot, and then those initial waiver wires come. So then I want to come in and get him. I don't want to use draft capital. I'm about to come in and get him.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I feel about Gordon too. If we don't know, if we don't get an answer on Gordon, that is
right. Gordon Goddard, like a law firm. No, and I'm one of the people that are overexcited. I'm overexcited about Goddard. Okay, I like the idea of taking players that we know they're going to be better than what we saw last year. We don't know how much better, and we get to find out while they're on our roster. But you're right that there's enough variety in Philadelphia now that Deshaun Jackson's there too. I like taking Deshaun Jackson too, for that matter. I actually think. Tell me if you think this is controversial, Rich. I think Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey have roughly the same value this year.
I think like the way you play the Philadelphia situation is you just draft Carson Wentz.
Or
like,
that.
He's the biggest winner. He's the clear biggest winner.
You have Aguilar, you have Arcega-Whiteside, and thus you have the running game. And this is what I'm going to ask about. Because did you see, Rich, I know you've been on vacation, okay, and for a while. It sounds like a good vacation. But do you see the Ravens hired a bunch of analytics people basically from Twitter? Right?
Yeah, I did. I was following that, and following a lot of the hires. And I remember the Panthers putting out their initial, job offer, and they filled that role too. So it's an exciting time to just see teams be at least open-minded, and bring them in, and for consulting, just to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think you would have a lot to offer to any NFL organization, and you would be able to answer some of the questions. And you could really tell that it's influenced by our conversations, because one of the things was, do running backs matter? Right? Wasn't that one of the questions?
It always is.
That was one of the questions, and one of the questions was like, is pass rush or pass coverage more important, and stuff like that. But what's really funny, because I want to circle back to something that you said about the Rams and Sean McVay and how he wants to actually run more. And we heard that about Sean Payton all the time, and he wanted to run more, and then he finally got the players to do it. And we saw the underlying like superstructure around the offense change and support different fantasy commodities than the previous structure had. And as you're hinting at, the Rams, I think McVay, if he could, would rather have a structure to the offense more like what the Saints have, right? More like what the Patriots did too. This isn't going to be lost on these teams. I think the Colts are doing this. You see the Eagles investing in Miles Sanders and bringing in Jordan Howard. And what's funny is people might be cheeky, analytics crowd. And by the way, like, the analytics crowd, and I don't consider myself
We're all
one of them.
cheeky on Twitter. We're all cheeky on Twitter.
And I say analytics crowd. I say analytics crowd and don't include myself in it, just because I'm not truly conversant in statistics and creating a study. I could probably come up with like, it would be great if and I did some work in IT, understand databases and things, but I could say it would be a good study if, but I don't have that the mindset for that. And I think what analytics has done have just totally changed how we talk about all these things and think about these things in a way that is irrevocable, and it's great. But when you say a question like running backs don't matter, and you assail these things like, Sony Michel didn't matter, or Saquon Barkley didn't matter, or how can you take a running back in the second pick, or how can you take a running back in the first round? There are still a larger thing happening, and I don't know if it'll show up so much in the numbers, but I think it'll show up in the numbers for the good offenses, is that running the ball does matter. And that running the ball actually is an important foundation, and not because of the body blows, and all that's part of it. I mean, I'm not going to discount that. But tactically, there are ways that being able to effectively run the ball. Again, just watch the Patriots. Like, whatever the Patriots are doing, chances are there's some like football truth with a capital T to that. And I do think like Philadelphia is going to run the ball more this year. Like you said, the Rams, they want to run the ball more this year. I think Chicago is going to use, and it isn't necessarily just running the ball, but using running backs as players that move the ball down the field for you, also in the passing game. So I do think we're going to see that continue to change. And then where it ripples down is like projecting the Chicago backfield or projecting the Philadelphia backfield. How, at this moment at least, Rich, are you approaching those two backfields?
Which ones did you say again? Sorry.
Chicago and Philly. Chicago.
Oh
and
yeah,
Philly.
Chicago and Philly. Yeah, yeah, and definitely going back to the thing. I mean, I definitely don't think I'm in the area of like where these guys are being hired as a data analysis,
Yeah.
as a data analyst. I would consider myself like I was more like the Blu-ray, like of the Blu-ray, the disc of the fantasy analysis. I came in a period where the VCR was around for so
That's so
long.
depressing.
So when people saw like stuff that I was doing, the initial work that I was doing with data, it was just like, oh, cool, Blu-rays. This is a way better way to look at this. But then like everyone just realized like Blu-rays just had a real short life too. That's kind of where a lot of these guys. I mean, these guys like Josh Hermsmeyer and the guys that got hired, they're doing these bulk studies. That's stuff I can't do. I mean, it's stuff. And the guys that are doing it on that level is really good. So I mean, I'm definitely not in their class on that level. But I will say from a fantasy nuance perspective, I'm able to tie it together a little better than those guys. No offense, guys. I
No,
mean, just to put
not
it
at all.
in my field.
And before we get to the pressing topic of the Chicago and Philly backfield, I just want to say, like, if you're Blu-ray, then I'm like Palm Pilot or like the Newton. You know what I mean? I'm glad that when I plug myself in the wall, it still turns on. But yeah, these uncertain, like, again, Rich, I'm toying with writing an article like your short to-do list, like this is your to-do list for your fantasy draft, and it basically is like take a stance on this, take a stance on that. Chicago and Philadelphia backfields are pretty important on that level. What's your stance as of right now?
Yeah, I mean, the Chicago one is interesting because we've already seen it reflect that David Montgomery's basically being drafted as, a low-end RB2 now.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of floating in that RB22.
He's ahead of Henderson
range. Right.
and people aren't even batting an eye at that.
No, I mean, he's kind of just floating into that, that he's already just gone to that range because, they assume that he's going to just take over that workload, and he very well could. I mean, the amount of draft capital the Bears put into him, not just the draft pick, but what they traded to get to that draft pick was significant enough to say that they want him. I will also say, though, about Dave Montgomery is the Bears themselves, we talked about that auction getting caught on the U. The Bears kind of were in a position where I think that they were thinking they could wait on what running back came to them, and it came to a point where those guys all went in a row. And they were like, we're going to miss out. Because, Henderson went 70, and then they jumped up to 74. I believe it was 74 to take Montgomery. Yeah. I might be wrong on that. But there was a little trickle of where the running backs went because this was a thin running back class. And I think that they kind of got caught in that back of that U, and we're like, we got to get this guy. If we don't get this guy, what are we going to do? And I don't know really what to make. I know you are one of the people that are higher on Mike Davis, and Evan is higher on Mike Davis. I mean, from an objective betting stance, it's hard for me to really just get behind a guy like Mike Davis at this point in his career. But I mean,
what's your hesitation?
Really,
and
I think he's a real serviceable player, is what I think. He's a really good.
These spikes, I'd be like, but he's a serviceable player. So this is like fantasy. This is fantasy football in a nutshell. You're like, but he's a serviceable player in the 14th or 15th round. You're like, yeah, he's just a serviceable player. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just kind of think that's where he is. But I think from a stance of the guy that you don't want to own there is, I think, is Cohen, just where he goes. I mean, one, I don't like to pay for the archetype of a receiving back coming off a career year. I mean, we've seen this archetype when the ADP gets bloated, and Cohen's ADP in context of from a lineup setting standpoint is fine. He's right around RB30. It's fine. But you're paying for a running back that inherently has got to reach a ceiling, has to score touchdowns on very few touches. That's just how it is. And that's the kind of player he is. And he's not a guy that at his size is going to be able to elevate to like out of that mold like a Christian McCaffrey or Reggie Bush. He's just not. An NFL coach is just not going to give Tariq Cohen 250 touches in a season. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. The exciting player, a player I like to watch, but I mean, in terms of context of what he did for fantasy, the aggression I would expect for him to roll those 8 touchdowns back on fewer than 200 touches, them getting rid of a guy who had a clear deficiency in the offense for 2 players that are just a lot more viable, I believe, that especially from a pass catching stance, and David Montgomery and Mike Davis is a problem as well. You add Cordarrelle Patterson into the mix as well, whatever he's going to do, whatever ancillary touches he's going to tack on creatively, and then the healthy receiving core, which they just didn't have from the jump last year, with Allen Robinson midseason. Anthony Miller played in a sling all year. Like, he played with a sling on his shoulder for the whole back half of the season. So I mean, he's the guy I think this at cost is I'm pretty hands off on at this moment. And David Montgomery, I see the upside, but you're already paying for it. So I mean, from the stance that we laid out, it makes conceivable sense, from, especially if you're drafting wide receiver heavy or if you're avoiding that tier of running backs I talked about. David Montgomery is in that RB15 to RB30 tier, whereas Miles Sanders is not. Miles Sanders is right on the outside of that. So, I mean, you can get Miles Sanders for a discount and play a little bit more off that upside, and both Eagles guys are there too. But I think we've got a good grasp on what Jordan Howard is as an NFL player, and we've heard the song every year. It's kind of the new thing we hear every year, whether it's not Devontae Parker, his swan, thing coming around. Devontae Parker's balling out in practice, dominating. We always hear it every year now. Jordan Howard's catching the football. Looks like a lot better receiver than what we thought. And, I'm of the mindset that most running back targets are very tertiary and anybody can catch them. But Jordan Howard has proved to not be able to catch those types of targets. So it's pretty proven. And so you're getting a guy that's just all rushing volume alone. And that's the worst kind of running back to have in fantasy football, because he has to score a touchdown. Like you're just contingent on him scoring a touchdown. And how do running backs score touchdowns? The offense has to set them up to score a touchdown. You have to be in one sector of the field typically to score a rushing touchdown. So Jordan Howard's just too contingent on just one set of outcomes to be a productive fantasy player for him to ever be on my rosters. But Miles Sanders is not. He's a guy who can catch the football, a lot of versatility. He's getting to play behind an offensive line that is, one of the better offensive lines in the league, one of the better offenses that they've shown in the league over the past 2 years. The problem with Miles Sanders is he already missed all of spring. So he hasn't been around, and then the possession of the ball. I'm trying to get away. The ball control issues that he showed at Penn State were very problematic. I play in a all Big Ten fantasy football league, and I had Miles Sanders, and I'm just like, there was points where I thought Ricky Slade was going to start playing because this dude just could put the ball on the field, every time. And, Miles Sanders had that, Saquon Barkley in him that he wants to take. He feels like he can house any run. If he can get just over those two things, ball control and not the fumbling issue and not trying to house every run, I think he's going to be a really dynamic NFL back. And where you can get him, if you go by the structure I laid out, he's entering your roster now as your RB3 or RB4, something like that, and you're not really counting on him and getting upside. So I am into Miles Sanders for cost upside, the things he can do on the football field, offense he's in, as opposed to where, you brought out the David Montgomery and where he goes in drafts.
And Zara Kansabadian, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, in the chat room brought up Justice Hill. And Justice Hill is a player that every time I look at my rankings, like, I need to move him up. And
every draft.
Yeah, and especially in a redraft mindset. And he compares Hill to Henderson, and he's right. And he's right that Hill might be even a little more of that type of player than Henderson, in terms of where I think he's just had a little narrower archetype than Henderson, because Henderson also wins collisions. Hill doesn't necessarily do that, but Hill might be a little, just like a hair faster out of the gate. They're both shot out of a gun. But really quickly, the hour's almost up. Time flies, man. Lord Reeves, Roto World, you know him. You know what this guy does. He should already be part of your life. Disney vacation. And I did the Disney vacation. I did it when I was 10 years old. And I did it again back in 2016. And my thing that I would tell people, and I was doing Disneyland, and they have that new Disney the California Adventure too, like both the parks. And it was fun too. And my love, Kate, and I had like a Olympics of all the different contests and games, and we made up some things that made it fun. One of the things that made it a little bit eerie that I'll put out there as a tip is, man, and this will be more important for some of you listening than others, the security is serious. Like a couple of times I would see them like, talking to each, this person bought 2 margaritas at the stand here over in sector G4, and we're watching them, and their friend is handing them back the margarita, and they're trying to get 2 drinks at once, and I'm like, whoa, they're serious. What was your Disney experience like, man?
It was it's layered here, so I'll run this down. So I live in an area of Ohio where I'm 20 minutes away from Cedar Point. And those of you guys that don't know what Cedar Point is, it is basically the largest amusement park in the United States for roller coasters. Right. For actual roller coasters, roller coaster enthusiasts.
The steel roller coasters, the crazy tangles of metal that turn into like insane. Yeah.
So me and my children were very let down from the Disney experience, from a pure like riding stuff and the amount of weight and the types of rides that they have. So my kids are into thrill rides. What can I say? And Disney doesn't offer that. Universal offers more. So my kids had the most fun at Universal, and my kids are more into the more Universal experience, but a lot more fun. And my kids are all over the place. I hear some people probably be like, "Well, how old are your kids?" Listen, man, my kids are 14, 6, and 2. They're all over the place. I had to forget what it was like having a baby.
That's
Yeah.
heroic, by the way, to have to deal with those 3 levels at once.
So I had to forget. Me and my wife had to forget what it was like having a baby to have another one. Like it's like what it was like. It's like, all right,
The
this was
convenient
like.
amnesia of nature. Like nature just wants us to reproduce and will pull any trick it can on us.
So I mean, we expected it to be hot. That wasn't a factor. I just think for the crowd and the so the people too that are doing this thing, Disney is like its own like. So the United States already is its own like capitalist endeavor. This place is like its own capitalist bubble inside that bubble. Like it has a capitalist ozone that is just wild. They know they got you. They know you're getting all your money. I will say, just from a park perspective, the best thing I liked most was just like how clean it was. And then as being going back there as an adult, so adult return, Epcot is way cooler as an adult, like as a 21-year-old. Go around the place of the world, get different beers from all over the world, the shops and stuff like that. We enjoyed that a lot more. The kids, like I said, even the kids, even my daughter is 6. Is into Disney princesses, into all that stuff. Just had a way better experience at Universal. Was way more into it because she goes to Cedar Point. I mean, it's hard to say. We're gonna wait 45 minutes to ride this. You know, we go to Magic Kingdom, the Aladdin ride, the Dumbo ride, and like the dinosaur ride. It's the same exact ride. You just get on a carpet, a dinosaur, or an elephant. It's the same exact ride though. She's like, we gotta wait 50 minutes. It does the same thing.
Smart girl.
It was interesting, but yeah, we went there, knocked it out of the park. The obligatory family Disney trip that every parent must make. I know the big Disney is going to come for me, but we will not be going back to Disney. We'll do Universal again. We'll do Universal instead.
I mean, I would probably, just if you're saying like the price tag for a Disney, and I mean, even if you're already in the geographical area, like you said, like there might be better parks or better things to do. And absolutely, like the one thing about the Disney experience that is uncanny is it is like a spotless spick and span reality.
It's crazy.
It's controlled. Like every element of it is controlled in a way that maybe there's like behavior going on, like behavior control or modification going on. And I know that the Star Wars, did you do the Star Wars thing at all? They have it up and running now.
Yeah, it wasn't open yet. So we also went to Universal the day before the new Hagrid Harry Potter ride opened that has the 10-hour waits now.
Right.
That was the day before. So we missed that too. But I mean, all those places, you got to let it breathe a little bit. You can't get around that area of the park when it opens. I imagine that Star Wars area is just swamped.
Right. Right. And I know that they were talking about like having people like truly be in character and creating kind of a lo-fi authentic experience in the Star Wars universe as opposed to just like a theme thing, which getting us like closer to Westworld, right? It's getting us closer to like this immersive experience. So who knows? This is the stuff that fascinates me about theme parks. But I also heard that there are things that are legal in California that may make the theme park even more fun. So think about that if you're on a Disney vacation out there. Take a vacation, everybody. Bill Belichick's on vacation. I'm going to go on vacation. I'm not sure when the couch is going to be back. Not sure when the Thursday night live show is going to be back. I know for sure we'll be back. I'll be back from vacation on July 19th. I'll be down North County, San Diego beaches. They're idyllic. There's the public beaches in the towns there. Encinitas, Solana Beach, Del Mar. Beautiful places. Leucadia. And it's beautiful to spend time with Lord Reeves. It's beautiful to spend time with you, our people. I hope you're having a great summer. And let's stay in touch while we also take a little self-care time over the next couple of weeks. Always love out to everybody out there. You deserve the love because you're so classy.